Imagine this. You're walking through an international airport, passport in hand, boarding pass printed, ready to catch your flight. You've planned everything perfectly. You've used a different name, changed your appearance, covered your tracks. You think you're safe. But what you don't realize is that the moment you stepped into that airport, you walked into the most sophisticated trap ever designed. The exits are controlled, your identity is being verified, and somewhere in the shadows, intelligence operatives are watching your every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This isn't a scene from a Hollywood thriller. This is the reality of one of Mossad's most brilliant operational strategies, the airport trap. And once you understand how it works, you'll never look at airports the same way again for decades. Intelligence agencies around the world have grappled with a fundamental problem. How do you capture someone who doesn't want to be found? Terrorists, war criminals, rogue agents, and international fugitives are experts at disappearing. They change identities like changing clothes. They move through underground networks that span continents. They hide in countries without extradition treaties, living under assumed names in communities that ask no questions. Traditional manhunts can take years, cost millions, and often end in failure. Send agents into hostile territory, and you risk international incidents. Launch a military operation, and you create diplomatic nightmares. The conventional approaches to capturing high-value targets are messy, dangerous, and frequently unsuccessful. But Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency renowned for its audacious operations and creative problem-solving, identified a weakness in even the most careful fugitive's armor. Eventually, almost everyone needs to travel, and when they travel, they have to go through an airport. Think about what an airport really is from an intelligence perspective. It's not just a transportation hub, it's a killing field of vulnerabilities. Every single person who enters an airport must submit to a level of surveillance and control that would be unthinkable in almost any other public space. You must present identification, usually a passport, which means your name goes into databases that intelligence agencies can access. You must pass through security checkpoints where your face is photographed, your body is scanned, and your belongings are searched. You must wait in designated areas with limited exits. Surrounded by security personnel and surveillance cameras, you are subject to the jurisdiction of the host country, which means local authorities can detain you on any number of pretexts. And perhaps most importantly, you are operating on a strict timeline. Miss your flight, and your carefully planned escape route collapses. This unique combination of factors makes airports the perfect trap for intelligence operations. Mossad understood this better than anyone. While other agencies were planning elaborate operations in foreign countries, risking their operatives' lives in dangerous extractions, Mossad was studying flight manifests, tracking travel patterns, and building relationships with security services around the world. They recognized that the modern world's obsession with air travel had created an unprecedented opportunity in the mid-20th century. As international air travel exploded and airports became the gateways to global mobility, Mossad began developing techniques to exploit this new environment. They pioneered methods that would transform airports from simple transit points into elaborate intelligence traps where targets could be identified, tracked, and captured with minimal risk and maximum efficiency. The genius of the airport trap lies in its psychological manipulation as much as its physical control. Consider the mindset of someone on the run. They're constantly looking over their shoulder. They avoid patterns. They trust no one. They're hypervigilant about surveillance. But when they need to catch a flight, something changes. The airport forces them into a routine. They must arrive at a specific time. They must follow a predetermined path through security, customs, and boarding. They must wait in designated areas for perhaps the first time in months or years. Their movements become predictable, and prediction is the foundation of every successful intelligence operation. Mossad operatives learned to identify these patterns, to recognize when a target was planning to travel, and to position their trap with surgical precision. But it wasn't just about catching people at airports. The true sophistication of the airport trap was in how Mossad used airports as bait, luring targets into situations where capture became inevitable. Intelligence agencies call this shaping the operational environment, but what it really means is manipulating your target as decisions so thoroughly that they walk into your trap thinking it was their own idea. Mossad became masters of this dark art. They would create business opportunities that required international meetings. They would manufacture emergencies that forced targets to travel. They would use cutouts and intermediaries to arrange conferences, family visits, or lucrative deals, all designed to get their target onto a plane and into an airport where Mossad had already laid the groundwork for capture. The beauty of operating in airports is that everything looks legitimate. There's no dramatic chase through city streets, no shootouts or high-speed pursuits, no obvious signs of an intelligence operation at all. When security personnel approach a target at an airport, it appears routine. Perhaps there's an issue with their passport. Maybe their name triggered a watch list. Could be a random security check. The target might not even realize they've been captured until they're already in custody, sitting in an interrogation room, wondering how their carefully constructed false identity was penetrated. By then, it's far too late. The airport has served its purpose, transforming from a gateway to freedom into an inescapable cage. The question that haunted Mossad's targets was always the same. How did they know? How did intelligence operatives thousands of miles away know exactly which airport you'd be in, which flight you'd be taking, which gate you'd be waiting at? The answer reveals the true depth of Mossad's operational sophistication. Long before a target ever set foot in an airport, Mossad had already been working, building an invisible web of intelligence collection that would make capture inevitable. This preparatory phase was where the real genius of the airport trap revealed itself, because Mossad understood something fundamental about human behavior. No matter how careful someone is, travel leaves traces. And in the modern world, those traces are everywhere. Every international flight requires documentation. Reservations are made, often weeks in advance. Credit cards are used. Phone calls are placed to airlines or travel agencies. Email confirmations are sent. Hotel bookings appear in reservation systems. Car rentals are arranged. Each of these transactions creates a digital footprint, and Mossad became expert at reading these footprints like a tracker reading signs in the wilderness. They cultivated sources inside airlines, not through dramatic recruitment operations, but through the patient development of relationships with security personnel who shared Israel's concerns about terrorism and international fugitives. They established liaisons with immigration services in friendly countries, gaining access to passenger manifests and border-crossing data. They monitored telecommunications, looking for patterns that suggested travel planning. They even tracked the seemingly insignificant details: a target's family member suddenly purchasing plane tickets, a known associate making inquiries about visa requirements, a business contact booking conference rooms in a foreign city. But intelligence collection was only half the equation. The other half was cooperation. And this is where Mossad's diplomatic groundwork proved essential. The airport trap only works if you have allies on the ground, officials willing to detain someone at your request, security services ready to coordinate their actions with yours. Throughout the Cold War and beyond, Mossad invested enormous resources in building these relationships. They shared intelligence with friendly services, offering information about threats that concerned their partners in exchange for future cooperation. They trained foreign security personnel, teaching them counterterrorism techniques while simultaneously building trust and establishing protocols for joint operations. They positioned liaison officers in key locations around the world, maintaining constant communication with local authorities and ensuring that when Mossad needed assistance, the infrastructure was already in place. Consider the operational mechanics of a typical airport trap. Mossad identifies a high-value target living under an assumed identity in a country or direct action is impossible. Maybe it's a terrorist planner hiding in a nation with no extradition treaty with Israel. Perhaps it's a former Nazi war criminal who has spent decades evading justice. The target is careful, rarely leaving their safe haven, surrounded by supporters who help maintain their cover. A conventional operation to capture or eliminate this person would require infiltrating operatives into hostile territory, conducting surveillance under dangerous conditions, and executing an extraction that could easily spiral into an international incident. The risks are enormous, the chances of success uncertain. But Mossad's intelligence analysts notice something interesting. The target is family in Europe. A daughter who recently had a baby, a son getting married, an aging parent in poor health. These are pressure points, emotional vulnerabilities that can be exploited through intermediaries who appear to have no connection to Israeli intelligence. Messages begin to flow. The family member in Europe expresses how much they wish the target could attend the wedding, meet the new grandchild, say goodbye to a dying parent. Perhaps there are assurances offered. A lawyer friend knows someone in immigration who could arrange special documentation, a way to travel safely without triggering any alerts. The target is skeptical at first, but the emotional pull is powerful. Weeks of careful manipulation follow, with multiple trusted sources all reinforcing the same message. It's safe. It's possible. This might be your only chance. Finally, the target makes the decision. They'll risk it. They'll travel to see their family. And the moment they purchase that airline ticket, they've already lost. Mossad now knows the exact flight, the departure city, the destination, even the seat assignment. They immediately begin coordinating with intelligence services in both countries. If the departure point is in a nation with good relations with Israel, arrangements are made to detain the target before they even board the plane. Security personnel are briefed, photographs are distributed, and a seemingly routine passport check becomes the moment of capture. The target is pulled aside, taken to a security office, and within hours is either in the custody of local authorities facing extradition or, in some cases, on a private flight to Israel before anyone outside the operation even knows what happened. The official story might be anything: a passport irregularity, suspected document fraud, a match with an international warrant. The target disappears into the legal machinery of detention and extradition, and by the time lawyers and family members start asking questions, it's already over. But what if the departure airport is in a hostile nation, somewhere Mossad can't operate freely? This is where the trap's full sophistication becomes apparent. Mossad allows the target to board the plane. They've already coordinated with authorities at the destination or even at a transit stop along the way. The target sits in their seat, perhaps feeling nervous, but also relieved that they made it through security without incident. They don't know that every step of their journey is being monitored, that intelligence officers in multiple countries are tracking their flight path in real time, that immigration officials at their destination have already been provided with detailed instructions. The plane lands, and the target enters the terminal. They approach passport control, documents in hand, rehearsing their cover story one more time. And that's when it happens. The immigration officer's expression changes. A call is made. Security personnel appear. The trap closes. The psychological impact of an airport capture cannot be overstated. Targets are caught in a moment when they believed they were safe, when they thought their careful planning had paid off. The shock of realizing they walked directly into a trap, that every decision they made was anticipated and exploited, creates immediate disorientation. There's no escape route, no backup plan that makes sense in this context. They race surrounded by armed security and a controlled environment, designed specifically to prevent exactly the kind of desperate action that might work in other circumstances. The walls are closing in, figuratively and literally, and the target knows with absolute certainty that this time, there's no way out. This psychological dimension of the airport trap is actually part of its design. Mossad understood that the moment of capture sets the tone for everything that follows. A target captured in a violent confrontation on the streets might remain defiant, energized by adrenaline, resistant to interrogation. But a target captured in the sterile, bureaucratic environment of an airport, surrounded by procedures and paperwork and officials calmly doing their jobs, experiences a different kind of defeat. It's not dramatic, it's administrative, and somehow that makes it more final, more crushing. The trap doesn't just capture bodies, it captures hope. The historical record, though often classified or incomplete, gives us glimpses of how effectively Mossad employed these techniques. In the decades following World War II, as Nazi war criminals scattered across the globe seeking refuge in South America, the Middle East, and other regions far from Allied justice, Mossad made their capture a priority. These men had changed their names, built new lives, and believed the time and distance had made them untouchable. But Mossad's intelligence network was patient and thorough. They tracked these fugitives for years, building complete pictures of their new identities, their families, their habits, and crucially, their travel patterns when opportunities arose for airport operations. Mossad was ready. The details of many of these captures remain secret, but the pattern is consistent: intelligence gathering, coordination with friendly services, exploitation of travel vulnerabilities, and capturing controlled airport environments where resistance was impossible and legal authority was clear. In the 1970s and 80s, as international terrorism became a defining security threat, airports themselves became targets for hijackings and attacks. But they also became hunting grounds for intelligence agencies seeking to capture terrorist operatives. The challenge here was different from tracking aging war criminals. Terrorists were younger, more cautious, operating in networks that provided sophisticated counter-surveillance training. They understood they were being hunted and took elaborate precautions, yet they'd had to travel, coordinating. International operations required face-to-face meetings. Operatives needed to move between training camps and operational theaters. Leaders had to attend planning sessions in different countries, and every time they traveled, they created opportunities for Mossad's airport trap. The techniques evolved to match the threat. Mossad developed methods for identifying terrorists even when they traveled under false documents. They built databases of known operatives, including not just photographs but walking patterns, behavioral tics, and associate networks. They understood that while a terrorist might successfully use a false passport, they couldn't completely change who they were as a person. Biometric identification was still primitive in those years, but human intelligence wasn't. Experienced Mossad operatives could spot anomalies in behavior, inconsistencies in cover stories, the subtle signs of stress that even trained operatives display. When passing through security checkpoints, they positioned surveillance teams in airports known to be transit points for terrorist travel, watching, documenting, building patterns of movement that could be exploited later. Sometimes the surveillance was itself the operation, gathering intelligence for future strikes rather than attempting immediate capture. Other times, when the target was valuable enough and conditions were right, the trap snapped shut. What made these counterterrorism airport operations particularly complex was the need for absolute certainty. Detain the wrong person in an airport, and you create an international incident that damages relationships with allied intelligence services. Let the right person slip through because you hesitated, and you might miss the only opportunity to prevent an attack. Mossad's reputation for operational excellence meant they couldn't afford mistakes. Every airport trap required extensive preparation and multiple layers of confirmation. They needed intelligence from at least two independent sources. They needed visual confirmation from trained operatives. They needed legal cover that would withstand scrutiny. And they needed split-second decision-making capability, because in an airport environment, opportunities appear and disappear within minutes. A target walking toward a gate might board a plane to a country where capture becomes impossible. The window for action is often measured in seconds, and hesitation can mean failure. The legal and diplomatic dimensions of airport traps required as much skill as the intelligence work itself. International law is complicated, full of treaties and jurisdictional questions and due process requirements that can derail operations if not properly navigated. Mossad couldn't simply grab people in foreign airports and spirit them away without consequences. Well, sometimes they could, but such dramatic extractions were reserved for the most exceptional circumstances. More commonly, airport traps relied on legal mechanisms that, while perhaps stretched to their limits, remain technically defensible. A target detained on an international warrant, a passport flagged as fraudulent, a visa irregularity, immigration violations. These bureaucratic tools became weapons providing the legal framework for detention. While Mossad worked behind the scenes to ensure the target ended up in Israeli custody, or at minimum in the custody of an allied nation willing to pursue prosecution, the genius of using legal mechanisms is that they're self-reinforcing. Once a target is detained by legitimate authorities on legitimate grounds, even if those grounds were manufactured or discovered through intelligence Mossad provided, the detention itself becomes a fact that must be processed through legal systems. Lawyers get involved. Extradition hearings are scheduled. Courts review evidence. And throughout this process, which might take months, the target sits in custody. Their freedom of movement eliminated. Their ability to continue their previous activities completely disrupted. Even if the ultimate legal outcome is uncertain, the operational outcome has already been achieved. The target has been removed from circulation. Their networks disrupted, their plans derailed. From Mossad's perspective, the airport trap accomplished its mission the moment the target was detained. Regardless of what happened in the subsequent legal proceedings, of course, not every country was willing to cooperate with Israeli intelligence operations, and this created interesting variations in how airport traps were executed. In countries with neutral or even hostile relations with Israel, Mossad had to be far more creative and careful in their operations. They couldn't simply call local intelligence services and request assistance. Instead, they worked through intermediaries, developed complex cover stories, and sometimes even provided intelligence about threats that concerned the host nation in exchange for their cooperation on specific operations. The principle remained the same, turning airports into traps, but the execution required additional layers of deception and misdirection. In some cases, Mossad operatives posed as representatives of other intelligence agencies, ones with better relationships with the host country, and others. They manufactured situations that gave local authorities their own independent reasons to detain a target, essentially hijacking existing security procedures for Mossad's purposes. The target might be detained on suspicion of smuggling, or because their documents triggered a legitimate security concern, never knowing that the entire situation was orchestrated by Israeli intelligence working from the shadows. The technology of surveillance has transformed dramatically over the decades since Mossad first pioneered airport trap operations, and these technological advances have made the technique even more powerful. In the early years, identifying targets required human operatives physically present in airports, studying faces, comparing them to photographs, making judgment calls about whether someone matched their intelligence files. It was labor-intensive, prone to error, and limited by the number of personnel Mossad could deploy. But today, airports are saturated with biometric technology. Facial recognition systems scan every passenger passing through security. Fingerprint databases are checked automatically at immigration. Iris scanners verify identities with mathematical precision. These systems, ostensibly deployed for general security purposes, create an environment where hiding becomes exponentially more difficult. A target might have a perfect false passport, a carefully constructed legend, and years of experience evading detection. But their face, their fingerprints, their biometric signature cannot be changed. And when those biometrics are checked against international databases that intelligence agencies like Mossad contribute to and access, The false identity becomes irrelevant. The airport trap has become automated, algorithmic web that captures targets without human operatives needing to be present at all. Yet technology has also created new challenges. The same tools that make it easier to identify targets also make it easier for sophisticated adversaries to detect surveillance, to understand when they're being tracked, to recognize the signs of an intelligence operation in progress. Modern terrorists and international fugitives are increasingly aware of the digital traces they leave. The cameras watching them, the databases recording their movements. Some have adapted by avoiding air travel entirely, relying instead on land borders, maritime routes, or simply staying put in safe havens where they believe they're beyond reach. This has forced Mossad to evolve their approach once again, developing new methods for creating situations where even the most cautious targets find themselves with no choice but to travel. Situations where the risk of staying hidden becomes greater than the risk of moving. Family emergencies remain powerful motivators, but so do legal threats, financial pressures, and manufactured crises that seem to offer solutions only available in specific locations. The airport trap has become more sophisticated, more psychological, more deeply rooted in understanding human nature and exploiting the universal needs and desires that eventually force even the most paranoid fugitive to take chances. The ethical questions surrounding these operations are complex and troubling to many observers. When intelligence agencies manipulate people into traveling specifically to capture them, when they exploit family relationships and emotional vulnerabilities, when they use legal systems as weapons rather than as mechanisms for justice, where exactly are the lines that shouldn't be crossed? Critics argue that some airport trap operations amount to kidnapping under color of law, that the involvement of complicit foreign governments doesn't legitimize what are essentially extrajudicial captures. They point to cases where targets were detained on flimsy pretexts, held without proper legal representation, and transferred to Israeli custody through processes that violated international norms. Defenders counter that the targets of these operations are themselves criminals or terrorists who have forfeited the protections of normal legal processes through their own actions, that the threat they pose justifies extraordinary measures, and that the alternative, allowing dangerous individuals to live freely simply because they've successfully evaded conventional justice, is morally unacceptable. These debates continue, but they rarely change operational realities. Intelligence agencies operate in moral gray zones by necessity, making decisions that prioritize security over procedural perfection, accepting ethical costs in pursuit of what they define as greater goods. What cannot be debated is the effectiveness of the airport trap as an intelligence technique. Across decades of operations, Mossad demonstrated that airports represent a fundamental vulnerability in the modern world's architecture of mobility. We've built a global system that requires people to identify themselves, to subject themselves to scrutiny, to move through controlled spaces where authority is absolute and escape is nearly impossible. We did this for legitimate reasons: to make travel safe, to prevent smuggling and terrorism, to maintain order in the chaos of international movement. But in creating this system, we also created the perfect hunting ground for intelligence operations. Every security checkpoint is a potential trap. Every passport control station is a place where false identities can be challenged. Every departure gate is a location where targets can be contained and captured. The airport trap works because airports themselves are traps, designed to control and monitor everyone who passes through them. Mossad simply recognized this reality before others did and built operational techniques to exploit it with devastating effectiveness. The legacy of these operations extends far beyond the specific individuals captured. The airport trap changed how fugitives think about movement, forcing them to calculate risks differently, to recognize that certain types of travel carry enormous danger. It demonstrated to allied intelligence services that airports could be force multipliers for operations, that patient intelligence work combined with international cooperation could achieve results that dramatic military-style raids could not, and it established patterns and techniques that intelligence agencies around the world have since adopted and adapted for their own purposes. Today, multiple nations employ variations of the airport trap, from American agencies tracking international criminals, to European services pursuing terrorism suspects, to Asian intelligence organizations monitoring dissidents and defectors. The technique Mossad pioneered has become part of the standard toolkit of modern intelligence work, a testament to its fundamental soundness as an operational approach. We're going to be exploring more legendary spy techniques, from Cold War dead drops to modern cyber espionage, breaking down the real methods intelligence agencies use to operate in the shadows. Drop a comment below telling me which spy operation you want me to cover next. And if you're serious about understanding the world of intelligence and espionage, check out the playlist linked in the description where we go even deeper into the secrets of Spycraft. This is just the beginning of uncovering how the intelligence world really works. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.